So tonight, we are very blessed and grateful to have Thay Thong Phap back again to bring us the timeless teaching of the Buddha. I will be very interested to find out what is the Buddha's perspective on wars. So these teachings always bring warmth and comfort to people's heart, especially during the difficult times. So for those who hasn't know who Thay is, so Thay Thong Phap is a fully ordained monk in a Vietnamese meditation tradition. His teacher is the most venerable Thay Thang Tu, a meditation master in the track lamp or bamboo forest school. Originating from Port Adelaide in South Australia and then moved to Tasmania, and he now lives in the southern Flinders Ranges with a small community of Anglican religious brothers and sisters. And he has a master's degree in social sciences and counseling and a diploma in psychosynthesis, and was a Buddhist representative chaplain at the University of Tasmania for 4 years prior to working for 4 years as the Buddhist chaplain at Oasis, the multi-faith chaplaincy center at Flinders University, South Australia. So they grew up within the Christian church, having been a novice monk in an Anglican Benedictine community, and has had a 40-year commitment to Buddhist Christian dialogue. His chief work as a Buddhist monk is in supporting the education of contemplative care workers of whatever philosophical or religious persuasion, but has a particular interest in developing Buddhist contemplative care workers. So welcome, Thay, and thank you so much for bringing us this topic on Dharma lessons from the invasion of Ukraine.
Thank you, Meredith, very much. It's lovely to be here with you again. We will start with about 10 minutes of meditation just to bring ourselves into this moment and the place where you're sitting. And then we will have the Dharma talk. And then there'll be a more contemplative reading of things, which will give us the opportunity to consider our practice altogether. So I'll invite the bell, and if you can sit in a way that is comfortable with your back reasonably straight and your feet on the floor and your hands resting in your lap, and we'll do some mindfulness of breathing meditation. While you are sitting there, I would like to invite you to bring your attention to your own body. Notice your body sitting in contact either with the floor or a cushion, or in contact with a chair or a couch. Just bring your attention to the place that you are sitting and the sense of contact with whatever it is you are sitting on. Bring your attention also to any kind of sensation that you are experiencing as you're sitting there. Maybe you are experiencing some kind of backache, some kind of itchiness. Maybe you are experiencing warmth in the atmosphere. or coolness. Maybe you are experiencing hunger, or you're satisfied. Whatever physical sensations you are experiencing, bring your attention to those sensations in the body. And simply breathe into those sensations. Breathe into the sensation and breathe out from the sensation. When you breathe in, become aware of any sensation in the body. When you breathe out, you let go of that sensation. You don't hold on to it. You simply breathe out. Breathe in and allow your attention to alight on any other sensation you might be experiencing in the present moment. When you breathe out, let go of that sensation and simply come back to your breath, entering and leaving the body. As you breathe in and as you breathe out, become aware of what is happening in your abdomen. If you want to, you can place your hands on the abdomen to help bring your attention to that part of your body. But simply, as best you can, bring your attention to the abdomen as you breathe in and as you breathe out. When you breathe in, notice what the abdomen does. And as you breathe out, notice whether the sensation around the abdomen changes. Just become aware of what happens in the abdomen as you breathe in and you breathe out. Breathing in with awareness of the sensations in the abdomen, and breathing out, letting go of those sensations. Breathing in, being present to your whole body, particularly the abdomen. Just being present to yourself as you sit there, noticing the in-breath, noticing the out-breath, and noticing its impact on your abdomen. And as you breathe out, on the out breath, have the experience of letting go completely. Breathing in, breathing out, and letting go completely. No holding on to anything. Not holding on to any physical sensation, not holding on to any thought or feeling. Breathing in, breathing out, and letting go completely. Simply resting in your body. Being present to your experience in the body. Being still, being quiet. Just resting. When you're ready, you can come back into the room. You may wish to open your eyes if they've been closed. You may wish to stretch. Just find a way to sit relaxedly in the chair for the period of this Dharma talk and the reflection to follow. So I'll start with just a short verse of acknowledging the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. On March the 2nd, which is only a couple of weeks ago, it was my 70th birthday. So now I get to be entitled to think of myself as a grown-up. Last Saturday, I celebrated my birthday in Adelaide. I drove the 250 kilometres to Adelaide and had a birthday party. We had lunch at a very pleasant cafe called Strappers in a suburb called Morfordville. The group included my brother and sister, their partners, my niece, her husband, and my 3 great nieces and great nephew. Then I had 2 cousins, one from each side of the family. My cousin Cynthia came with her husband, and my cousin Jennifer came with her daughter Tracy and her son Darren. Darren's daughter Amalie, my second cousin once removed, was there, as was Tracy's daughter Ruby, also my second cousin once removed. And then there were 2 old friends, Anne and Di, who attended. It was a very friendly and loving group with delicious food and a delicious chocolate birthday cake, which my sister had so generously prepared. And I might add that I managed to blow all the candles out at once. After that party, I went back to the Buddhist library above Dr. Phap's surgery in Parafield Gardens. Dr. Phap is a Vietnamese Buddhist doctor, and she's my GP. And she and her husband, when he was still alive, built above their surgery quite a lovely large space that contains a library and a small bedroom and kitchen and bathroom. So whenever there are visiting monks or nuns, they get to stay there. And there are so few visiting monks and nuns who come that I get to stay there practically all the time for myself. So I went back to where I stay in the library. There I joined 2 people, one called Ruth and the other Jeanette, for a lovely evening of guided meditation and Dharma sharing in the Plum Village tradition, the village of Thich Nhat Hanh. It was peaceful and calm and rich with loving fellowship with people from all around the world. Following that really special evening, I arranged the meditation mats on the floor and slept until 9 a.m. the next morning with Joey and Lucy, who are my dogs, lying by my side. In the morning when we woke up, we spent some time cuddling and playing and licking. It was a beautiful and peaceful time of sharing our love with one another. Altogether a grand time. But then another reality set in. Around the other side of the world, I remembered the events in Ukraine, happening at the very same time that I was enjoying myself. There was the bombing of Kharkiv and Mariupol, and that bombing was destroying people's homes and their lives. Food and water was becoming impossible to access. And those who were not dying from bombs and bullets began to starve to death and lack decent water. Families were being torn apart. I was so touched by the images on the news of the young father who had to see his wife and child off as they travelled to the west of Ukraine, while he stayed to protect his country. This young man sobbed uncontrollably, clutching his little daughter. She too cried. And I thought, of course, that he might never see his child again. This is a kind of suffering that I have no idea of. And frankly, I'm glad I don't know that kind of suffering. But he may well. While I was enjoying the fellowship of Buddhist friends in a sacred space, the people in the east of Ukraine and in the beautiful city of Kyiv faced the distinct possibility of the destruction of such beautiful churches in those cities. And for example, the churches in Kyiv, such as St. Volodymyr and Santa Sofia, 2 very old churches. that could well be destroyed in the bombings. At the same time, in Holland, there were 3 priests and a deacon in the Russian Orthodox Church who decided painfully that they would part company from the Patriarch of Moscow, Archbishop Kirill, and they would join the Patriarch of Constantinople, Archbishop Bartholomew. They did this because they couldn't abide the Russian invasion of Ukraine. None of this at all was like the happy situation I knew in quiet little old Adelaide. And then on the news, there was the footage of the lady with her wide-lensed glasses sitting in the basement of a railway station in Kyiv, smiling gently, not knowing what was going to happen. And she held her beloved dog sitting on her lap. And there have been quite a few pictures of people fleeing to the west of the Ukraine with their dogs on a leash. I can't even imagine being with Joey and Lucy in that situation. And yet it is so in 21st century Ukraine. Every day I wake up and my mind immediately and automatically flies to what I'm going to call Ukraina, which is the Ukrainian word for Ukraine. I feel so much sorrow that I weep, and during the day I pray in Ukrainian to a God I don't normally worship. And then I trace on myself the sign of the cross in the Orthodox style. Во ім'я Отця і Сина і Святого Духа. Amen. Why is this Anglo-Celtic Australian Buddhist monk so attached to and grief-stricken for Ukraine? On Thursday of last week, I wrote a letter to someone called Theodore Budas. And this is the letter. Dear Theodore, my name is Peter Hawkins. We haven't seen each other for 43 years. We knew each other best in 1965 and 1966 when we were students in first and second year at Woodville High School. I've been thinking of you a lot over these terrible weeks of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and wondering what you and so many other Ukrainian Australians I know must be feeling at this time. My memories of our friendship have been very strong lately in my mind. I remember that we all had to go to the inter-school swimming carnival at the city baths next to Parliament House in early 1965. I was typically completely bored with the proceedings. I asked you if you would teach me your language, something far more interesting to me than sport. So by the end of the day, I could conjugate with pronouns the verbs to have and to be in Ukrainian. Я маю, ти маєш, він, вона, воно має. Ми маємо, ви маєте, вони мають. In the May holidays of that year, and with the help of a small primer called Bukvar, which you lent me, I taught myself in 2 days to read Ukrainian, an alphabet which I've always loved to look at and can read automatically. The first word I could read was Marika. That was your sister's name. I quickly grew to love the Ukrainian language. In 1966, I went as the first Anglo-Celtic child to the Ukrainian ethnic school for a year and attended the folk dancing class. I've never forgotten the Ukrainian I've learned and have continued to love the language, which an old Orthodox priest once told me I speak with an accent from the west of the Ukraine. And that was a really lovely thing to learn. Over the years, I've met many people who were from Ukrainian families and always took the opportunity to speak to them in Ukrainian. I've always been very glad of that connection. These treacherous events have been on my mind constantly, and I have wept a great deal on their account. When I was in Ukrainian school in 1966, I learned by heart the following prayer. Боже великий єдиний, нам Україну храни, волі і світу промінням, ти її осіни. Світом науки і знання, нас, дітей, просвіти, в честі любові до краю, ти нас, Боже, зрости. Feeling powerless to do much else, I've been praying this prayer every day. Theodore, we don't really know what lies ahead for Ukraine and her people, except much pain and sorrow. I will continue to hold you all in my heart and hope for the renewal of the country. Best wishes, Peter Hawkins. My heart is for ordinary people, actually. Ordinary people just living to know peace in their lives and love for their families and friends. I remember Pan Lavrivsky, who drove me to Ukrainian school on Saturday mornings and taught me that a person who speaks one language is one person. A person who speaks two languages is two people. I remember Pani Khrushchevska, an older, stout, and very formal Ukrainian woman teacher who so patiently and lovingly accompanied me in my adventure into this new world. She embroidered me a beautiful traditional Ukrainian shirt called a sarochka. I remember Pani Papa, our neighbor, who dressed as a peasant Ukrainian woman, whose garden was a farm with kohlrabi growing and chooks and rabbits. She cooked for her son Miroslav and me holubtsi and vareniki, delicious Ukrainian food. She showed me letters from her family in Ukraine with chunks blackened out by the party censor. I remember Maria Zadorozhny, my school friend, who tried unsuccessfully with me to establish a joint Catholic and Protestant youth group at our school, who went on to train for 4 years as a pediatric nurse. And when she eventually got to go home to Ukraine, her relatives told her how sorry they felt that she was growing up in a grey and miserable capitalist country. I remember my year 12 friend, the very beautiful Marina Pozhidaev, who was half Ukrainian and half Russian, and who made sure that our year 12 class always got to go to the Russian balls organized by the Russian community. I even got to dance some Ukrainian dancing and occasionally have a drink of vodka. I think of all the Russian people who are being arrested for demonstrating against the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I think of the young woman who so bravely stormed the news broadcast with her banner that said, "Нет войны." I don't read Russian as well as I read Ukrainian. No war. And she was immediately arrested. I think with an ache in my heart of the young Russian man in Sydney who, out of his disagreement with his homeland's invasion of Ukraine, publicly burned his Russian passport. I think of all the Polish people who were one-time enemies of Ukrainians and they were familiar with the trashing of their own capital city, Warsaw, by the Nazis, now offering refuge to their neighbors. I think of the generosity of the neighbors of Ukraine, the Moldovans, the Romanians, the Poles, the Hungarians, the Estonians, and I am inspired by their love and reminded of Thich Nhat Hanh's teaching, people are not the enemy. The enemy is intolerance, fanaticism, dictatorship, cupidity, hatred, and discrimination, which lie within the hearts of humans. As I have been reflecting on these events and my own 70 years, I realize that there has been no let-up from violence and warfare and the suffering of ordinary people since I was born, and of course for centuries before that. Here's a short litany of some of the suffering that has been known in the world just in my lifetime. Ukraine, Afghanistan, Syria, Lebanon, the Palestinians, the Israelis, Iraq, the Balkans, Iran, Northern Ireland, the miners in the north of England, the Zimbabweans, the South Africans, the Ugandans, the Rwandans and the Burundians, the Sudanese, the Somalis, the Ethiopians, the Vietnamese, the Laos, the Cambodians, many mainland Chinese, the Tibetans, the Uyghurs, the people of Hong Kong, the Tamils in Sri Lanka, the people of Myanmar, the Rohingya of Myanmar, the Buddhists of the Chittagong Hills district in Bangladesh, the East Timorese, the people of Irian Jaya, the Chileans, the peoples of Central and Southern America, African Americans, Indigenous Australians, all Indigenous people around the world, the Koreans, LGBTQIA+ people all around the world, women and children, men forced to work in dangerous situations and forced into the armed services. And of course, there are all the others that have suffered from this kind of terrible violence that I failed to mention. And it's not only Russians who have blood on their hands. The United States of America and its allies like Australia are guilty of murder and mayhem. I, for one, am not afraid to acknowledge that my forebears invaded this island continent and claimed it in the name of the King of England, William IV. He was the king when Adelaide was settled. Adelaide was his wife. I have the blood of First Nations people on my hands and on my family's hands. And I live in a country where the government refuses to acknowledge that in a treaty with people whose land we stole, whose culture we set out to destroy, and whose people we murdered and denigrated. So what does the Buddha have to say to all of this? I'd like us to engage in some reflective reading. And Meredith will bring up on the shared screen 2 documents that I've sent her today. The first one is a manifesto written by a Sri Lankan monk called Walpola Rahula, a Theravadan monk. And there is also, afterwards, a litany composed by 2 monks, Shantideva, who was an 8th century Common Era Indian philosopher, monk, poet, and scholar at the Mahavihara of Nalanda. And his co-author is a 21st century South Australian monk, otherwise known as me. So instead of opening this discussion for questions or opinions at the end, what I would like you to do while you are listening to these reflections is to consider what the Buddha has to say in terms of what practice you are inspired to engage in your moment-by-moment life, right where you live, that will contribute to transforming the horrors of war and violence and greed and hatred and ignorance. This is what Venerable Walpola Rahula said. Buddhism aims at creating a society where people are more respected than those who, oh, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong page. I apologize. Buddhism, oh, I've made a mistake in sending it to you, Meredith. Buddhism aims at creating a society where people are respected. Oh, sorry. I'm not sure if I've got the book here in the room with me, but if I have, I'll read it.
If you have the corrected one, you can actually share as well, if it is on your screen.
No, it's not. That's the thing.
It's not.
Yeah, I don't know why I've written it out wrongly. Okay, so let me just look for the book. There it is. This is actually a really lovely book to read, and you can get it for free from the corporate body of the Buddha Educational Foundation in Taiwan, Walpola Rahula. Buddhism aims at creating a society where the ruinous struggle for power is renounced, where calm and peace prevail away from conquest and defeat, where the persecution of the innocent is vehemently denounced, where one who conquers oneself is more respected than those who conquer millions by military and economic warfare, where hatred is conquered by kindness and evil by goodness, where enmity, jealousy, ill will, and greed do not affect human beings' minds, where compassion is the driving force of action, where all, including the least of living things, are treated with fairness, consideration, and love, where life in peace and harmony in a world of material contentment is directed towards the highest and noblest aim, the realization of the ultimate truth, nirvana. To me, that's a really powerful statement of exactly what the Buddha intended for human society and human beings' behavior together. The second is a litany, which is something I wrote a number of years ago for an International Day of Peace gathering at the Quaker Meeting House in Hobart. And I read this out in the company of two other Buddhist people. And I'll just read it slowly for you here now. And as I'm reading it, again, there's the invitation to you to consider what are the ideas in here that speak more profoundly to your condition, that in fact inform more of how you would want to live in a world in order to bring an end to war and violence. So I've alternated verses by Shantideva and verses by myself. May I be the medicine and the physician for the sick. May I be their nurse until their illness never recurs. May I be an advocate for the oppressed and exploited. May I be steadfast until we are all free. With showers of food and drink, may I overcome the afflictions of hunger and thirst. May I become food and drink during times of famine. With ears to listen deeply, eyes to discern wisely, and hands to uphold tenderly, may I be a means of healing for the anguished and the distressed. May I be an inexhaustible treasure for the destitute. with various forms of assistance, may I remain in their presence. In the face of power and destructive force, may I have the courage to speak truth. For the sake of accomplishing the welfare of all sentient beings, I freely give up my body, enjoyments, and all my virtues of the three times. May I have a heart open to all sentient beings, great and small. May I choose humility, love, and dialogue. Surrendering everything is nirvana, and my mind seeks nirvana. If I must surrender everything, it is better that I give it to sentient beings. To the friendless, may I be a friend. To the homeless, a place of warmth and safety. To the stateless, may I be a refuge. May I be a protector for those who are without protectors, a guide for travellers, and a boat, a bridge, and a ship for those who wish to cross over. For the young and the innocent, the old and frail, female and male, whose lives have been shattered by war, violence, rape, starvation, and disease, may I be a cause of hope, restoring dignity. May I be a lamp for those who seek light, a bed for those who seek rest, and may I be a servant for all beings who desire a servant. For those imprisoned, tortured, and murdered, may I be a strong voice of reasoned protest until these forms of abuse are expunged from the lives of all sentient beings. To all sentient beings, may I be a wish-fulfilling gem, a vase of good fortune, an efficacious mantra, a great medication, a wish-fulfilling tree, and a wish-granting cow. For all who suffer needlessly, may I be skillful in liberative action, swift to bring freedom. Bearing witness to all sorrow, may I cultivate the heart of a spiritual warrior. Just as earth and other elements are useful in various ways to innumerable sentient beings dwelling throughout infinite space, so may I be in various ways a source of life for the sentient beings present throughout space until they are all liberated. Just as there are countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas active in the three periods of time and throughout the boundless space of the Dharma realm, so may I cultivate the spirit of awakening for the purposes of eliminating all greed, hatred, and ignorance. And now, as long as space endures, as long as there are beings to be found, may I continue likewise to remain, to drive away the sorrows of the world. Now, the first piece of writing is from a Theravadan monk. And I'm aware that many of the people who are part of the Association of Engaged Buddhism are, your Buddhist practice is informed by Theravada Buddhism. The second piece is from Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva Path. My tradition and my own personal journey is with the exploration of the Bodhisattva path. And so this litany for engaged Buddhists for me is very much part of that journey of the Bodhisattva. And when I read it, when I read through that litany, or when I read through the Bodhisattva vows, which I did earlier in another talk with AEB, quite often I feel like it's entirely unattainable. How am I going to do all of these things, or any of them, any one thing? My feeling is that if I if I say, no, it's not possible and I give up, then there's no chance of anything happening that's good in the world. My sense is that I must try, no matter what happens. And then sometime last year, when I gave another talk to AEB, I talked about the moment by moment Bodhisattva. The Bodhisattva who doesn't try to do heroic things, who doesn't try to change the world wholly, completely right now, but who finds the small things in this world, in the world that we live in, and tries to do something about those small things, whether that's just acts of kindness to people who are having a hard time, whether it's the opportunity to provide for joyful moments in the lives of people, whether it's, in this instance, the opportunity to donate money to the Red Cross to help Ukrainians who are having a real struggle, whether it's the opportunity just to inform ourselves about the suffering that living beings are experiencing at this time, whichever part of the world they live in. And I think another thing that's necessary, absolutely necessary in the Bodhisattva path, is that we learn to trust ourselves, that we learn that our good hearts make a difference in the world, that we don't necessarily have to be great game changers, but we do have to bring the love that we have in our hearts, the loving kindness, the compassion, the open-heartedness, and the sympathetic joy to every circumstance we encounter, and make some small contribution to an end to this worldwide culture of war and violence and hatred. So what the Buddha is saying, or what Walpola Rahula is saying, and what Shantideva and I am saying, I think is consistent with what the Buddha would say, and that is to find ways in which each of us can bring wisdom and love and skillful means to the lives we live in the world. Knowing that, in fact, it's possible that what we try to do won't actually happen. But if we don't try to do it, it will certainly not happen. So I wonder, now we'll stop the Dharma talk. I hope it's made some sense to you. I can never be certain. But what I would like you to do is to think about one of the verses from the litany, or something that came from what Walpola Rahula said, that makes sense to you, that inspires you in some way to act in the world as a force for peace, as a force for love, as a force for creativity, as a force for reconciliation. And when you're ready to share your thoughts, just put your hand together and we'll acknowledge you. You can, of course, ask questions or disagree with me. I'd really like you to consider how you might practice in peace in the world.
Yeah, everybody's welcome to just unmute yourself and ask questions, or you don't have questions, you have any comments or any thoughts, any insights, so you can just share with everyone.
I wonder if you might take the share screen down so that I can see.
Okay. Frank's from Hungary, isn't it?
Yes. Hi. Thank you very much for this enlightening evening. I see things now completely differently. I look at it not as a politician, but as a human, as a suffering human being. I'm a Hungarian, and I'm so glad to report that this weekend, last Sunday, I collected $4,000 to send to the Hungarian-Ukrainian border, where near 300,000 Ukrainians joined the Hungarian people, and I was so happy to see them cooking all night, closing the schools and heating the schools for the refugees to stay the night, and so many little kids, even little dogs with the people, because I have the Hungarian TV here locally, so I'm following the whole situation. And I was proud to be not just a Hungarian, but a human being that put away the past differences. The Hungarians, more than a quarter of a million Hungarians live in the Ukraine because it was part of Hungary, and then after losing two wars, it was taken away. And unfortunately, the Ukrainians have some faults themselves. They stopped teaching Hungarian in the schools. For the first 4 years, they allowed it, and then they stopped it completely. And they done the same thing for the Russian, Romanian, Polish, and other languages. And that stopped them to join the European Union. So politics and our own faults come into the situation. So now, who's at fault? The Russians or the Ukrainians? It doesn't matter who's at fault. Human beings, once they asked the Buddha, Lord, we all want to live in peace. And why we cannot live in peace? And the Buddha answered, that was Sakka, the king of the gods, asking, envy and selfishness, that brings all the problem. Envy and selfishness because we like this thing, we don't like the other thing. Therefore, this goes on like like a snowball coming down from the roof. So, but we forget all the past, all the difficulties between nations and politics, because I can see my own people. The petrol price is so bad in Hungary, and still people drive 300,000 refugees to the capital where they can look after them, and already given Hungarian citizenship if they want to stay there. But most of the people rather go on to Germany, Berlin, because Hungary is not a very rich and not a big country. But already jobs are offered to them, and schools are opening already. It's incredible how fast the human heart can work. So I know I took too much time, but I was so proud going to St. George Bank and saying, I'm sending $4,000 to the refugees. One of the happiest moments of my life. So thanks for listening to me, Thay. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Frank. It's a great things that you do. Many people have sent you birthday wishes in the chat. And also, Faye, I'll read your message, Faye. Faye said that I was particularly taken with your story and letter to your friend, Thay. So secondly, seeing the Sri Lankan summary on the goal of Buddhism starting with oneself, that rang a bell for me. Compassion is a key. Yeah, it's a very, very beautiful things that you have done, Thay, sending that letter. It really touched my heart too. So I just thinking that at the in the midst of this chaos and everybody's talking, about the war, you know, the energy, the negative energy arouses, like just like when people talk politics, sometimes I just think that they're just talking and talking, nothing's done. You can't change anything, but then you just like all this negative energy arises for nothing. Not like Frank, at least like you putting into a positive actions to do something positive. And they, by sending that letter, I feel that in the midst of chaos, and you know, that actually warmed their heart, like, you know, you just give that loving compassion energy even to just one person, it may radiate to others, which I think it's really very powerful.
Can I say two things? First of all, over these last couple of weeks, Frank, I've been thinking of you a lot, and thinking about all the kinds of things that have happened in Central and Eastern Europe, and being really glad that the Hungarians and Poles and what have you have been able to be so generous and kind to the Ukrainians. So you've come up in my mind a lot, Frank, in the last couple of weeks. But the second thing was that last Sunday night, I don't know why I decided to do it, but I looked up Panyavaru Bhikkhu's World Buddhist, you know, he's got that what is it called? This is one of the non-benefits of being 70. He's got a world list of Buddhist organizations. So I thought, oh, well, I'll look up what Buddhist organizations there are in the Ukraine. And I did, and I found something like about 15, but they all belong to the one tradition. Anyway, so I wrote out in English, I wrote out a greeting to them, a message to them, and then I translated it into Ukrainian, and I sent it to every Ukrainian Buddhist organization that is in that thing, and most of them came back as not being functioning. And I thought, well, that's probably reasonable considering that the country's plunged into war. But I got one reply back, and it was from Buddhist group in Kharkiv, which is in the eastern part of Ukraine on the border with Russia. And it was in English, and it was so sweet. I said to them that I was holding them in my heart, and all Australian Buddhists are doing the same thing. I presumed that anyway. I might be wrong, but you know, as far as lies go, it's not a bad one. And they wrote, and I wrote to them telling them that I was holding them all in my heart, and if there was anything I could offer to help them, I would be happy to do that. And they wrote back in a really lovely English style. I'll see if I can find it for you. It was just really, I was really glad I did it. It's not that they were asking me for anything, but the fact that we reached out to one another was the thing that mattered the most. And now I can't find it. It doesn't matter. No, I've gone past it. What they were doing was just saying, thank you very much for thinking of us, and it matters a great deal to us that you are thinking of us. And I thought, oh, good. You know, like there's nothing I can do physically very much except for donate money to the Red Cross. But the fact that I was willing to write to them and reach out to them, and that they were able to write back, and we'll never have anything more to do with each other. But just in that moment, there was this connection, and they know that people all around the world are thinking lovingly of them, was very important to me. Yeah.
Mm.
And it's lovely to see you, Mr. Jeff Newton, tonight. I hadn't expected to see you. Jeff was a student of mine doing clinical pastoral education.
And welcome, Jeff. Jeff just joined us as our member. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. When I saw you were talking tonight, Thay, I had to join.
Very
I've
kind.
done, yeah. At least I've done the marketing part. Right.
Is there
Yeah.
anybody else with anything to say?
Yeah.
How the Buddha's teaching through Walpola Rangla and Shantideva might have inspired you to become active in your doing around transforming violence and war.
I don't remember the full line, but it was the one with the spiritual warrior quote in it.
Yeah.
I've always kind of seen myself as that way. Like I've got that. I don't know. I'm not afraid of the combative nature that can come up with when you have to confront people or things that are sort of, I guess, not evil per se, because I don't really think there are evil people, but confused. And when you must when you have to put yourself forward to stop them from acting out on their confusion in ways. So yeah, that resonated with me.
And you've made me wonder whether that's the role of the United Nations, to get in the road of people who are confused, who are full of greed or hatred and want to harm others. I'm not sure the United Nations does a great job, but it does the best job it can. And some people just come into this life with this karma almost, that is warrior karma. I don't think I've got any at all particularly, but if you have it and you can use it skillfully and well, then it's a great gift to have. How do you actually practice that, Sean? Have you got an example of what you've done?
It's easy to practice the warrior bit. The spiritual bit is harder. Being the spiritual warrior. I do karate, and in my traditional karate, there's a very big spiritual aspect to it. So we're very about building, sort of confidence and, acting with integrity and things like that. As a practice for like the spiritual warrior, where people are confused, I guess I just, standing up to bullying, or, maybe where I notice someone might be talking to themselves in a way that's really negative, or, I know that doesn't seem like a spiritual warrior moment, but to me it really does, because it's preventing someone from using their confusion to sort of harm themselves. I guess being sensitive to the people around you, because you really need to be careful with boundaries and taking into consideration people's wishes, and so yeah, those are the things I think about in terms of a practice.
So that's like being a skillful warrior.
Yeah, for sure. I would say that, yeah.
Now, while you're talking, I'm thinking of a Tibetan teacher called Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, and he was in both the Kagyu and the Nyingma school of Tibetan Buddhism, and he established a whole school that was concerned with becoming the spiritual warrior. And I can't remember the name of it, but his followers, his students, they teach whole lots of stuff around being the spiritual warrior. I've just looked up on Google, but it hasn't got anything in there about his particular position on the spiritual warrior. But there is material around, excuse me, about that whole question of becoming a spiritual warrior, of acting powerfully, but wisely and compassionately in the world, using skillful means. And I think, what's her name? Pema Chodron, if you've ever come across her, she's one of his students and an American nun who talks a lot about being the spiritual warrior. So you may find some of that interesting to read. I don't know.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, could you type his name in the chat?
Yes.
Thank you.
I'll type his name and in the chat. Trungpa Rinpoche is dead now, but his student is Pema Chodron, and she's written lots of books that are very accessible to Westerners. She is a Westerner. There we are. And there's a whole organization, and there's a group of them in you're in Sydney. There must be some people in Sydney too. But there's a whole group in Adelaide who practice in that spiritual warrior tradition. I can't remember their name, but it'll be there somewhere in the books written by Chogyam Trump. I'll have to change that. That's the self-correcting function of the computer, which actually makes more trouble than it's worth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Trungpa. Now that's the Mahayana's tradition, but I don't think that makes any difference really. Anything else?
Susie, got anything to share?
Yeah, I'm reminded of this poem by Emily Dickinson, which says, "If I can stop one heart from breaking, I shall not live in vain. If I can ease one life the aching, or cool one pain, or help one fainting robin onto his nest again, I shall not live in vain." And I take that into my practice to think that all of us, if we can just do more compassion and metta, loving kindness, meditation, and spreading it, we all can do something to help, even though it's not physically, but it's like rain. It will fall and it will hit people, and hopefully some sense will come to some, from this madness, and it will all come together. We must go on with that belief, or else, it's all in vain.
Susie has been busy cooking for the homeless. Every week, she cook a lot and then offer to the homeless in the city, Sydney, in the city, right, Sue?
Not just in the city, but in like people who are in assisted housing, public housing and things like that. Yeah. Right. Well, not every week though. I only do it like once in 2 weeks.
Right. There's still a lot. I saw you cooking. It's a lot of cooking. Sadhu, sadhu.
There's a Vietnamese name for people like you, Susi, or Sujata. There's a Vietnamese name for people like you, and it's called Hien Thai Bo Tat, and it means moment by moment Bodhisattva. It means that just every moment, just in very ordinary circumstances, we can do things that bring great transformation into the world. And that's what you're suggesting. That's what Emily Dickinson is talking about. It's a form of Bodhisattva practice, I think. And I think that to some extent, that's all we can do. We don't have any control over anything that's happening in Moscow or Kiev or even Canberra necessarily. So the control we have is in each moment and all the circumstances that surround us. which I think makes us at least as powerful as politicians, if not more so. We just have to have faith in ourselves. What we call in Pali saddha or shraddha in Sanskrit, confidence, faith. I think we also have to make sure we look after ourselves.
True.
It can be a busy life.
So if you still have any questions, everyone's welcome to unmute yourself and chat with Thay, since Thay is here very kindly. Thay will also be back next month. Thay's been very kind because Bhante Teacher Damo has not been well. He's got operation from last year, and Thay has very kindly offered to come on board and offer his teaching at least once a month. So we're very grateful about that day. So Thay will be back next month, 28th of April. Again, I will put up in the Facebook to inform you. So if you want to listen to Thay, next month Thay will be back. Yeah. And next week we have a workshop coming up by David and Tina again. So it's also like a dialogue session. It's more like more discussion. So David Oros and Tina from Metta Center, I think a lot of people know Tina. So they will have a 2 days workshop over 2 weeks, so 2 Thursdays, on the topic of equanimity and compassion in a changing world. So their workshop is a very engaging workshop rather than like it's not like a Dharma talk type of workshop. It's like they're really discussing, involving a lot of sharing, dialogue, discussion. So it'll be very interesting over the next 2 weeks. So hopefully you all can come on board again and participate in this Zoom session. So it's very nice to see everyone in Zoom. At least we can't see you in person yet, but at least we can see each other, and you know, like our group energy, positive energy. I believe that we radiate that positive energy, you know, even in the Zoom sessions. I think it helps the world as well. All right. So is there anyone who has any other things to ask Thay or to talk to Thay?
Hey, can I just ask, are you actually in Adelaide, or are you outside of Adelaide?
Oh no, I grew up in Port Adelaide, which is adjacent to the city, but a much higher class place. The working class suburb. No, I live about 250 kilometres north of Adelaide, at the southern end of the Flinders Ranges. Now, the Flinders Ranges is a mountain range that runs north and south up, or really sort of, no, it doesn't really run north and south, it runs southwest to northeast, in the up north of Adelaide. And it's a mountain range that is actually 800 million years old, I think, and it's much, much older than the Himalayas. But because it's very old, it's been worn down by erosion, but it's still very beautiful, and it's got a very spiritual feel about it, and it's a home to a number of indigenous nations that live up this way, and it's very dry and very hot, which is not unlike the rest of South Australia, but that's where I live, and I live in a little town called Gladstone, and part of the reason I live here is that when I came back home to South Australia from Tasmania, some people offered me a little hermitage to live in with my dogs, but they wanted to sell it. So my friend, who's been my friend all my life and who is an Anglican priest, she offered me the opportunity to live here. And as I'm not particularly interested in living in the city, I took the opportunity. So I live up here, and we have a very quiet life, and it's become even more quiet during the COVID period. And a lot of the work I do is done on Zoom. I have a small sangha which I lead in the city, and we've met every Monday night for 2 years for meditation and Dharma study. And this year we are going to meet on the first Monday of each month in the city, because our classes then will be on the precepts, and we are really keen to look closely at the precepts and how they can direct our lives, and not only how they can direct our lives, but how they can help us understand ourselves more deeply. And then in a couple of weeks, we have one person who's going to take the refuges and the precepts, and we have a little 6-month-old who is going to be offered the refuges and given a Dharma name and be made part of our community. And interestingly enough, this child is so beautiful. She's got such a beautiful smile, and she's all kind of chubby. And when I thought about what name should I give her, I decided immediately that she had to have the name Maitreya Buddha or Metteyya Buddha. So in Vietnamese, that's Yilak in Vietnamese. And so she'll be called Tam Yilak, which means the heart of Maitreya, because she's so beautiful and such a lovely round face. She looks like Maitreya Buddha sitting there all fat.
That's nice.
Yeah.
The very first thought I have when I saw her is, you have a connection with Maitreya Buddha.
And they Sean now has a great interest in Mahayana now. Sean was asking, because most of my engagement with Buddhism has been with Theravada. What is a good place to start with Mahayana?
I think the best place to start with Mahayana is Theravada, because really one of the well, for myself, my first Dharma teachers were Prakantipalo and Ayakema, who were both the founders of Wat Buddha Dharma in the Darug National Park. And they both passed away now, but I'm so grateful to both of them because they gave me a really solid foundation in the Buddha Dharma. The one thing that was always very real for me and that wasn't so obvious in their teaching was the Bodhisattva. And the idea of the Bodhisattva is an awakening being whose task it is to help people transform their own lives. One of the reasons I think the reason the Bodhisattva ideal appealed to me so greatly is that I grew up in the Christian tradition. And when I first read Shantideva's statements about the Bodhisattva and first heard about the Bodhisattva, I thought, well, that's a perfect description of Jesus. That's what he was. That's how he lived his life. So I was drawn to the Bodhisattva ideal. But the Bodhisattva ideal is definitely there in the Theravadan tradition. If you read all of the Jataka tales, for example, they are the story of the gradual awakening of the person who became the Buddha. And even though a lot of people in the Theravadan tradition don't necessarily take much notice of the Bodhisattva powers, Bodhisattva is there. So I'm not sure that you need to go outside of your tradition. But if you were really serious and you weren't going to listen to what I've just said, you could start with Zen, or what the Japanese call Zen, what the Chinese call Chan, what the Koreans call Sun, what the Vietnamese call Tien. And it's really simply the practice of meditation without terribly many fruits. And Ayakema, for example, the Theravadan nun who founded Wat Buddha Dharma, she practiced in the Zen tradition for a while, and Thich Nhat Hanh, he also practiced in some Mahayana traditions. The truth is, I think there's not a great deal of difference. And people who get very attached to one thing or the other just become sectarian, and they're caught in the I, me, mine thought. People say, Mahayanas say, oh, the Theravadins, they just want to practice for themselves. Well, you know, you do meet lots of Mahayana monks and nuns who are just there for their own sake. They'll practice for themselves. And then you'll meet lots of Theravadins who are practicing for the sake of others. People who run AIDS places in Thailand, or places for dogs or elephants, or all sorts of, they give a whole lot of their life and practice to the care for others, and to the spiritual growth of others. Your teacher, Tejadama Bhikkhu, he's a bodhisattva. He's given so much of his life and his energy for your sake. That's a bodhisattva. It's the same with all the great teachers, you know, people like Ajahn Chah or Buddha Dharma Bhikkhu in the Theravadan tradition. They put all their effort and all their energy into the care of others, into the awakening of others. So, you know, I think that the Theravadins who complain about the Mahayanas and the Mahayanas who complain about the Theravadins are just wasting a lot of time, really. I don't know if that helps you, but I had I got some wonderful advice from a Ramakrishna mission nun once. And I went to her with the question, I love the Christian faith. I love, what's the Ramakrishna mission? Vedanta. And I love Buddhism. Can I have all three? And her advice to me was, you need to dig a well and keep digging in the one place. If you dig here and then dig there and then dig somewhere else, you never strike water. But if you keep digging in the one place, you'll strike water. And so as soon as she said that, I knew what my path was, and here I am. And when I met my own teacher, who was an old Vietnamese monk who didn't speak English, and I don't speak Vietnamese, but our encounter was so powerful that I realized that this monk was not looking at this person with a long white nose and thinking, he's a fool, I'll just... No, my teacher taught me because he wanted to help me, and he did it with a lot of compassion. So I thought to myself, well, here I am. I'll stay here and do my best to dig the well deeply, exactly where I am. Maybe that's the message for you. If you have a teacher in the Theravadan tradition, just keep digging that well with that teacher.
Thank you so much, Thay. I think, is it Lucy that was like calling you already? Is it time?
Lucy starts to sleep. I don't know, that's some other dog somewhere else.
Okay.
So we dedicate the merit.
Yes.
May the wholesome energy generated by us now and at any other time be for the benefit of all living beings. May all beings be well. May all beings be happy. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings know peace and joy and the causes of peace and joy. And may we all continue to walk the Buddha's path of truth and love together. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Good night. Thank you.
Sadhu, sadhu.
Thank you, Bante.
Thank you so much, Thay, and thank you, everyone. If anyone would like to offer dana to the teacher, you may just let us know, or if you make a donation online, just indicate that if your donation is for the teacher. All right? So thank you again, everyone. Have a very good night. Thank you, Thay. Have a good night, Thay.